Hey everyone, I am super excited to have with us a very special guest today on Found the Stories podcast. Today we have the absolute honor to host my dear friend John Lehr. John is a very special individual. He is the GP and co-founder of an incredible firm called Workbench. Or if you have not heard of them, I highly advise you to go to Google right now, put in Workbench, and you'll see all the incredible things that you're doing. John has been a VC for a little bit over 10 years, so now we can actually have feedback if he's good or not, because they say it takes 10 years to know if you're good. But what I am super excited about is to know who John is as an individual person, to learn his principles, his values, who he is, how he makes the world a better place, and what are the lessons that got him to where he is today that we can apply to our own life. Now, before we jump into this incredible podcast with John, please, as a favor to John and to myself, please subscribe on whichever platform you're listening to this episode. So this could be YouTube, Spotify, iTunes. Go ahead, subscribe, leave a review. And obviously the best feedback possible is to let John know after this episode, send him a personal note of how much you enjoyed this episode. So John, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. Excited to be here today.
You're welcome. It's an absolute honor. So I want to start off with, you've been in this business for 10 years. It's a long time. And, 10 years, after 10 years, most people usually get burnt out. And you have incredible energy about talking about Workbench, looking at new investments, just keeping on innovating. Like, it's incredible to see what you guys are doing. What keeps you going? Like, what gets you so excited? What gets you still excited about this industry?
Sure thing. And again, thanks so much for having me. So just to level set context, right? At Workbench, we actually turned 11 this past July.
Wow.
Definitely enthused, and every day is exciting. And for people unfamiliar, we're an enterprise fund that really made an early bet on New York City that we would be really a thriving enterprise ecosystem. And the other big bet we made was that most Silicon Valley firms would start with really the tech when evaluating investment opportunities. We tend to be quite thesis driven.
Okay.
And those two things came together and really helped us get going to be differentiated with Workbench. And, when I think about what keeps me going, what keeps me honestly super excited is really three things. Number one is my co-founder, Jess, and I made this early bet on New York. And obviously New York is a center really in the world for so many industries, whether it's financial services, whether it is, fashion, media, et cetera. But we always looked at Silicon Valley and saw, obviously it's the tech hub of the world, but why couldn't and shouldn't New York really be a home and hub for all things enterprise? If you think about it, we have the most Fortune 500 customers in the world, especially the three early adopter industries across financial services, pharma, and media. So we've got the customers here. And we've got incredible companies that have really scaled here. So not just folks that opened offices over the past decade, like the Googles, the Twitters of the world, but some of the early waves of the New York, really like V1 and V2 in the consumer world, media world, the Gilts of the world, the Etsy's of the world, that actually brought incredible talent relevant to the enterprise. So if we think about Gilt, there was amazing data science talent. Etsy, great cloud infrastructure and dev tool talent. In addition to obviously folks like the Mongos, the Datadogs, the DigitalOceans that have scaled, and really now some of those folks have actually left and started their own companies. So when I think about what gets me excited, step one is New York continues to really make its mark on enterprise to be this home and hub. Number two is our team, right? We are a very small, tight-knit team of 6. My co-founder, Jess, and I have been working together 11 years. Our third GP, Kelly's been with us 8.5 years. Priyanka, one of our principals, 5 years. Kira, our head of platform, 5 years, right? So it's like we've got a very tight-knit team. So coming into the office every day is just an absolute blast. And then the third thing, honestly, is, of course, the founders, where every day we get to either work with a portfolio company, evaluate new investments, in a single day doing all of that. And just the energy of working with these amazing people trying to change industries and evaluating really the impact that they can make fires us up, and we have a really good time doing it.
Wow, I love that. So I want to break each one up and focus on the first thing first. So when you started 11 years ago, was there no enterprise community in New York?
So there really wasn't. And what's really cool is I actually got my start to even have the opportunity to do Workbench. It was really a little bit of luck. But if I just go back a few years before, I used to work in IT at Morgan Stanley in this pretty unique, but also, again, really fun role in the office of the CIO, where basically banks tend to be the earliest and largest adopter of enterprise tech. A lot of folks from the outside don't realize that, but to make financial services world work, it requires a lot of infrastructure and tooling. And my team was really at the front lines after the financial crisis in evaluating, big data before the AI hype hit the world, the first inning of cloud, constantly evolving security paradigms. And what was really interesting that moment I was at the bank is you had the old stalwarts, the IBMs, the EMCs, the Ciscos, where their tech wasn't meeting the new needs we had. And if we were thinking at that moment, it was all about new capabilities after the financial crisis, as well as just cost cutting. So we really turned to the startup community to get to solve those needs. And what was really interesting to me is I looked around in New York City and I'm like, wow, we're doing a ton as Morgan Stanley, our peers at Goldman, BAML, JP, et cetera, are all working with startups quite early. Why is there no community for that here? And if I think back to this time, right, this is 2010, New York Tech Meetup was the focal point of New York Tech at large, right? And it was so cool because it really had like a social element too.
You were the founder of New York Tech Meetup, right?
The Enterprise Tech Meetup. So basically, New York Tech Meetup was hosted by down at NYU Skirball. Every month they would do an event, and it would draw founders, it would draw executives, it would draw VCs, and literally all of New York Tech fit in that one room of like 800 people. The tickets would sell out immediately as if it's like a hot concert, right? The one thing that I always share though is that if you asked about business models, so all these people would demo their products, and they have like, let's say 7 different people do 5-minute demos. If you asked around the business model, you would get booed. So I'm like, something's not right here. In my day job, there's a thriving need for startups to engage with the enterprise. At night, there's an incredible community and just genuine excitement around tech. Why is there not a community for enterprise tech? So that's what really inspired. Off the back of the New York Tech Meetup in January of 2012, so almost 13 years ago, I started the New York Enterprise Tech Meetup. And at Workbench, we kind of dub it the home and hub for the suits and the hoodies, the corporates and the startups to really engage with each other. And thankfully, that community took off because it was a place where if tech trends are moving really fast, corporates could go learn in an environment where they're not getting like harassed by a salesperson, honestly, right? Startup founders and operators could go learn what is top of mind, what is going on, and just frankly build their network in an authentic way. And by doing that for a while, that's what really helped shape basically the ecosystem for enterprise at that moment. And some folks had basically connected me with one of my original investors as well as my co-founder, Jess. So that night and weekend hobby project turned into like one of the greatest things and opportunities in my professional career.
Do you see, or you have more instances in your life that something like that happened where it was just a hobby or things like that and actually came into something reality?
So it's not even just that. I think one of the biggest things, and it's funny because I even say this word a lot with my team, it's besheret, where a lot of times I don't think something you're doing or something that happens to you, you may not realize the downstream impact. And even at the moment, I can share a negative example where, I was a biomedical engineer in undergrad, lived with 5 Wharton guys at Penn, had thought I wanted to do biotech stuff or medical devices, realized, this isn't for me, wanted to work on Wall Street after school. In my head, I was like, oh, maybe I want to do biotech VC. And all of senior year, everyone got jobs early in like investment banking and stuff. And I was this random bioengineering guy interviewing, and they're like, what are you doing? Why are you even here? And I just kept going, trying to find a job in the financial services world. And it wasn't until 2 weeks before graduation that I ended up getting an offer at a hedge fund. And it was a different interview than any of my other interviews. It wasn't the typical banking thing. And they were like, oh, your resume doesn't make sense. It was, oh, you seem good at math because you've taken such advanced courses. And the guy literally fired off math problems to me that I had to just answer on the fly in my head, which thankfully I did. And I got a job, right? So I get a job 2 weeks before graduation. But then, in my head, I'm like, oh, shoot, they want me to start a week after school ends. And all these people were going on these long extended trips before, to enjoy that last summer of freedom, so to speak, before a full-time job starts. I started immediately. Now, what's interesting about that is it's not a story for here, but basically that fund, which was like a 10-man shop, the founder ended up he died. The brothers who were his PMs accused the wife of murder. It was like this whole 60-minute special. And meanwhile, I'm like this 22-year-old in his first job, unaware of all of this. But, 3 months into the job, the fund shuts down. And I'm about to not have a job, and I have to pay rent in New York City. And, I'm from Miami, and my family's still there. And I got to figure this out. And, one of those besheret moments, had I not been working for several months and proving myself, one of the MDs there had actually went to go work at a different company, and he took me with him. as the financial crisis is happening. So again, had I not started early, I wouldn't have had that connection. I would have still been that random bioengineering guy. But here I'd shown through my hard work and this relationship that it's worth taking this junior guy with them. And then through that job, ended up getting connected eventually to Morgan Stanley IT. So, you have these moments where you can pause and think, why is this happening to me? It stinks. But I always am a very firm believer that if you look in kind of the long run, stuff is meant to be, and you just got to really keep grinding it out. And then eventually that luck happens where the pieces come together and you're like, that's probably why this happened.
Yeah, wow. That's like pure, what I call some people call hindsight, I call it divine providence. What else have you seen in your life, or any investments that you've seen that come across the same way like that?
So an investment that we're wrapping up right now. So typically what we'll do especially at Workbench within our enterprise software focus, we have 4 key swim lanes, right? We have AI, ML, cybersecurity, dev tools and infra, and then application layer, which touches, vertical apps and some future work related stuff. And an interesting one came up actually quite recently where, for the most part, right, within vertical AI, let's pick, we haven't been able within the broader AI category, rather, to touch things like foundation models or tooling, either because it's just too capital intensive as a small seed fund, or it was just too hypey as a price and other reasons. But one of the areas we've played is actually in vertical AI opportunities. And what's really interesting is we got connected. This is my craziest deal source ever. And haven't shared this story publicly yet, so this is a fun one. But a family friend from Miami, from my synagogue growing up, is a Moyle. And he did the bris for this guy who's a founder of a startup. And he was talking to the guy, obviously, and getting to know him. And it turns out this guy's an entrepreneur. And not only is he an entrepreneur, but he's building in the vertical AI category in real estate. And for the most part for us, we won't touch prop tech because it's a different buyer universe, different sales motion, et cetera. But this company that we're hopefully closing on soon is actually taking on this software called Argus, which is basically the Excel for real estate. And after my hedge fund days, the job I had landed at was like a small family office that did real estate acquisition. So all day I lived in this software Argus and I lived in Excel, the two together, to do these real estate evaluations. And I haven't thought of Argus in a long time, but during the financial crisis where I was at this company, had to pay rent in New York, and it was not the best job. The boss was not a nice guy, but I just had to make ends meet. I couldn't quit. So actually on the side, I did a lot of consulting kind of secretly. This is before everyone had like 10 side hustles, but I would just stay up all night doing like consulting projects for people in Argus because they couldn't afford the software because it was a big enterprise sale to get Argus. Anyway, I became an expert in it. Long story short, I haven't thought about it for a long time. I meet this founder and he's actually building a Gen AI powered Argus competitor. Can ingest automatically rent rolls from an offer memo. It can do cash flow analysis and net operating income buildup that really mimics Argus, but instantaneously. And then part of their shtick is they also incorporate market data and can use some of your historical analyses. That founder, when I spoke to him, I was doing it initially as like a favor, like, hey, I'll give you advice. But as soon as he started saying Argus, I started finishing his sentences and knew the ins and outs of what he's building. And he's like, no one has ever understood Argus, let alone the level of detail asking such minute questions. And again, when you think about like everything coming together, a Moyle family friend from synagogue as a kid connecting me to someone who's doing Argus, and the time is now, because for the past decade, you couldn't really ever take it on because it has such a market hold. But with the data extraction capabilities of Gen AI, with really the opportunity to increase velocity and a bunch of other factors, the time is now. So all that comes together. And, hopefully that deal is going to be wrapping up shortly. So it's like, there's just so many of those kind of moments where right place, right time, seizing that opportunity and recognizing it.
It's that, and you have to take a step further because, if you look back, you going out of graduating college, not having a job, somehow getting a job at a hedge fund, your resume didn't make sense, asking math questions at work, you went there, didn't work out, the other guy schlepped you to the next fund, and then you couldn't pay rent, you had to learn Argus. It all adds up. Everything is crazy. Wow. What other story do you have like that?
I don't have any as wild as that. That was like the early career thing. I mean, it's basically that was the V1 of my career, I would say. And then the part 2 really is running this meetup on my nights and weekends. And I guess to elaborate on that story a little bit of why the meetup was so meaningful, and again, just like lucky in a way, and Bashar, it is, at that time, no, there wasn't a big enterprise community, as I mentioned, in New York. And if you think about it, the VC community here was quite small too. So I knew I really wanted to get into venture. I knew from my day-to-day job that I had a unique vantage point, right? I'm understanding enterprise tech at a much deeper layer than most people because I'm at Morgan Stanley, which is at the forefront, up and down the tech stack, really able to talk the talk. I also have this unique lens into really customer empathy. How does a startup navigate, sell into and ultimately close deals with a highly regulated industry? So I had this unique experience, but when I was talking to VC funds at the time, the big feedback was, you're not a banker, so you can't do growth stage investment at a place like an NEA. And you're not a founder, so we're not going to hire you at a traditional fund here in New York. So there were like 3 people that even cared about enterprise at the time, but I wasn't a fit for any of them. But because I had done the meetup, I actually got connected with R. O'Donnelly, the global printing company, who at the time, the CEO was very forward thinking, right? This is a print company that had the foresight under Tom Quinn, the CEO, to say, you know what? We want to be engaging with the tech ecosystem. We want to improve our brand. We want to get the benefits of this wave of innovation, but we actually don't want to try to raise a corporate venture fund like everyone else. They didn't have the DNA for it. So what he, and credit to him, he had the idea is, what if we LP and create a fund, but it's off our balance sheet, but it's managed externally by end up being me and Jess. And we have this workspace that we can fund to let people really build that ecosystem. So we got connected, me and Tom, through people that knew me from the meetup. And then one of his key advisors had connected me with Jess, right? One of those moments when Jess and I were fundraised, they always laugh, how do you meet? We always joke, it's a professional arranged marriage, but it is. We didn't know each other before. And for all the pitfalls that GPs or even co-founders of startups go through, we're very fortunate we have the best partnership ever, complement each other's skill sets, both just work our butts off. And to have that opportunity back in 2013 to say, hey, I'm interviewing, trying to join any firm, and then it's, hey, here's a $10 million fund, here's this big workspace, go figure out a strategy, go figure out how you want to build community and what you want to do with it, wouldn't have happened if I hadn't done the meetup. And, fast forward, me and Jess obviously turned that into everything that Workbench is today.
How do you and Jess work on your relationship to make sure the partnership is strong?
So what's really cool is this has been going, 11 years. I think it really comes down to complementary skill sets. Each of us respects each other so much. We, again, as a small team of 6, all communicate quite openly, and we just both go, right? Like both of us, I think, are pretty good execution machines. And there's never, I hear about co-founder dynamics where sometimes one person is carrying most of the load and the other person can't evolve. So there's frustration that builds up. I hear about egos that happen and people are fighting over credit. Credit to, I think, both of us. There's no ego for either of us. And we both kind of just keep learning as we go. And then we try to bring the whole team up with us as we continue learning. So, whether it's in having complementary investment swim lanes, whether it's having complementary things that we each own on the team, and then like bringing that together, again, 11 years in, we're at the office working together late. We're slacking each other very late at night, WhatsApping first thing in the morning. Like we're both just so locked in. And, one of the hardest parts on the journey was when we did raise some of those early funds before we had a track record. And we always laugh that it's this sinusoidal journey. Even within a single day, you could have the highest highs and the lowest lows. But something we always laugh about is that thankfully we've never both been down on the same day. Because, we are human. Sometimes you'll have a bad day and one of us could be a little bit low. But the other one of us always picks each other up, and we've never both been low on this. There's plenty of days where we're both high on the same day. But we've never been low on the same day. So,
what do you do on a bad day?
Just take a step back and realize you'll get through it, and just keep grinding.
Okay. Is there anything else you do, like to deal with the emotions that come up, or the voices in your head, or the fact that you're pitching this institutional LP that you thought was a 90% chance, all of a sudden next thing you know, he's like, you know what? Sorry, man. No.
So all of that and more has happened on the journey. What do I do? I think it's not about a specific day-to-day mindset. But one thing, on this podcast, you like to dig into some of the personal stuff for people. I tend to be grounded on a day-to-day basis and just see the big picture. For me, I start off every day and I do my tefillah and I pray. And, having that every day and, this notion of just gratitude not just in your prayers, but just realizing like, I'm a very fortunate person to have my health, to have my family, my kids, to have this job. Like, I think in today's day and age, people get so caught up. I'm not big on social media. I don't use Instagram or TikTok or anything. It's very easy to kind of look at everyone else and be jealous. And, oftentimes it's kind of fake. It's not even how they really live. But just starting that day very centered and realizing I'm a pretty lucky guy, have that gratitude. And then it gives you, I think, just the inner strength to go deal with anything during a day. And again, that could be an LP you thought was working out. It could be a company that's struggling. It could be internal stuff on a team. But, you just approach all of it really in execution mode because, it's the only way through.
Right. Yeah, that's totally true. At the end of the day, if you look at it, really spend some time, like we're rich. We have a healthy family, a great relationship. Our needs are covered for, all the basic stuff we have. Yes, there's obviously everything else. But you touched upon, not comparing you to other people, which is obviously one of the biggest things what bring people down, the desire to be like someone else, like to live someone else's life. But I want to apply that to venture capital because, you've been building this for 10 years. Do you ever feel like you look at another fund that's been around for 10 years and has raised, let's say, $1 billion and it has a sense of jealousy or like, hey, what's going on? How come I'm only here and they're there?
So it's even easier than someone else who's been there 10 years is someone that started today and starts with 150 million or $1 billion. The answer is no. Everyone has their own situations. And this is part of one of the reasons I actually love being here in New York. And Jess and I talk about this a lot, where VCs in Silicon Valley, that is your whole life. So I feel like the forces of jealousy would be around you more. It's everyone at every interaction on the weekends, at a dinner, at a drinks. It's like, did you see that deal? Did you get into that hot deal? Did you FOMO somebody? Are you a part of this hot new fund? And again, here, what's really nice about New York, besides, the strategic benefit of why Workbench is here, is that tech is the bottom of the totem pole at the end of the day. And I like it that way. Let finance kind of be the big dogs in the room and have the ego, and they can outduel each other. By being here geographically a little bit away from the valley, it gives us enough room to kind of do what we want and feel great about it and not worry about as much other people. So that's really on a more day-to-day basis, we're shielded from it a bit. But then it's also, very intentional. We raise our funds because this is the stage. We raise our funds because that's the right amount for the stage we invested seed. We do seed because it's our skill set where we're best aligned to both out-diligence someone, especially for pre-revenue infra deals and things like that with our theses, as well as where we can best support the founders. And again, that's what fires us up is that 0 to 1. If you break the 0 to 1 of product market fit and then go to market, even into 0.25 and 0.5 and 0.75, like there's so many steps on that journey that all of us on the team just every day wake up fired to support, whether it's on the sales front, marketing, helping with some product stuff, getting them in front of customers. All of that is what makes us so happy every day. So we're not wasting time being jealous of other people. Like we've got it good and we love the people that we work with.
So really having gratitude.
Gratitude and enjoying what we do. I'm not trying to be somebody else.
That's it. Once you try to be someone else, then forget about it. It's a downhill spiral from there. So then how does Workbench reinvent itself constantly? Like you mentioned, you can have the new kid on the block that raises a $150 million fund. And, they're getting all the deals. And here you have Workbench, been around for 10 years. How do you stay relevant together with all the newcomers? Because you have so many new solo GPs and so many new funds. So how do you constantly reinvent yourself to stay relevant?
So I think it's really important, number one, to not chase trends. And then number two is that little bit of reinvention. So if I talk about the chasing trends part, right? In really the ZERP environment, 2020, 2021, everyone was chasing forget valuations, forget pacing, just throw as much money as you can because the next person's gonna, be on the hook for it and it's all gonna be good. And at the time there was cryptomania and obviously some people have theses around them, but a lot of people were just gambling. And I keep my gambling to Vegas. I don't do it with LPs and ignore my fiduciary responsibility, but we know what we are, right? So again, we're thesis-driven investors. We take a concentrated approach to pacing, portfolio construction, and things like that. So staying very measured is number one. Number two, though, is the ecosystem does change, right? What New York looked like a decade ago for enterprise tech versus a decade later in 2020 versus, 5 years, 2010 to 2020 to 2025 are all different phases. And things we did pre-COVID were different than how we kind of reacclimated after to even things today. And as a recent example, there's a lot of folks that moved from San Francisco over the last 2 years, and a lot of them are at that point in their careers where they probably do want to launch startups, and all of them come from companies where perhaps they have pre-existing seed VC relationships from the West Coast, just given that community out there. But it's our job to figure out ways to engage them, whether it's, when 2 years ago we did like a new to New York happy hour event, then it's obviously, on the tactical front, stuff around our go-to-market and how to pitch as a technical founder, and, Gen AI trend panels where you get, bank buyers as well as key startup people involved, and then everything in between, right? So figuring out ways to engage them, going to different places. I mean, this is a small detail, but an event we did last month that Jess thought of and spearheaded was this happy hour in Brooklyn. Because a lot of folks, obviously people come from Brooklyn to our events all the time, but just go there where it's like you don't have to take a subway, but you could walk a 2-minute block to this restaurant where we did this event. And then the plus on it is, let's partner with pre-seed funds, right? You just mentioned there's a lot of new solo GPs or like 2-person operations that are actually quite complementary to us. So how can we partner with them, help each other, and also bring new folks to the table? So that event was a huge success, and we have follow-ups with so many people from that session. So within the framework of Workbench, which is, identify investment themes, we tend to be quite active on our blog, sharing the research. We'll then host community events around it. And then, there's a lot of corporate and customer engagement with that overlaid. How do we make sure each of those pieces is constantly refined so that the model itself actually works quite well over the past 11 years, but making sure you're relevant and updating, even our brand right now, we're working on a new website, and it's like, should we rethink our logo? Small details like that, where, 11 years in, me and Jess are still figuring out to, obviously some of these examples on the event, the content, the research, et cetera.
I do like the flywheel. I look forward to your email every single Friday. I've been to a bunch of your events. You guys do a phenomenal job. But I like the flywheel, how everything plays into each other, and then the fact that you're constantly thinking how to level it up. When you think about your fundraising, right? Did you see a difference with the duration of how long you guys have been around, with the timeline it took you to fundraise a fund?
Yeah. So if I think back again, so that Ardali Fund 1 was the way that me and Jess kind of built that early track record. It's equivalent to like how people have angel funds or like micro funds today. The first institutional fund we raised was that 49. And back then the question was even like, what is a workbench? What are you? How do you define it? And, there were so many pieces that Jess and I just, Jess used to work at Cisco. I worked at Morgan. We came from that IT world. We weren't part of bigger funds that we just spun out and like knew the game and knew the LP fundraising journey. So there was a lot of learning, you jump, what's that analogy? You jump out of the plane and then you build the parachute or whatever. Like we were doing that. We were learning as we went, making a ton of mistakes, but we iterated quite quickly. And we just, again, the grittiness, we weren't going to give up. There was no other way. So one easy example of that was we didn't know who to talk to on the LP front. Today, there's blogs about it. There's courses. There's, different programs dedicated to emerging managers. For us, we thought, pension funds are LPs, right? They invest in funds. Cool. We're raising 49. In hindsight, so many checks from these folks are bigger than our entire fund, right? So it was barking up the wrong tree. But we spent weeks. We got access from a friend to their PitchBook account. We spent weeks with this exported list trying to find contacts, doing all this work, getting meetings. And then it's like, wait, this is the totally wrong group to even be talking to. And here in 2024, it's obvious for people that are in the industry and there's enough content you can research. There was nothing we could Google back then. There was no one really at scale that was helping. So what we leaned into was these networks that we had built, both GPs we had worked with through that first $10 million Fund 1. There were some people who were very generous with their time and expertise. I was part of the Coffin Fellows program, built a great network of folks that were able to give everything from feedback on the deck to intros and things. Jess was a part of All Raise and built a community there. So we learned a lot and then just kept going and figuring things out. And, as the years go by, people see, oh, wow, there's a name. I know what Workbench is now. Oh, wow, they're actually quite disciplined in what they do. this New York enterprise ecosystem is actually becoming a thing. Oh, some of their companies, we always like to be thoughtful and steady. We're not momentum chasers. These companies are turning into real businesses with real ARR under the hood. Oh, wow, they've actually kept with it and they did what they said they would. And then, each step of the journey, communicating along the way, staying consistent, right? Like that Friday newsletter and a bunch of other things and doing what we said we would. And eventually that all comes together quite nicely.
Wow. So how long did it take you to raise that 49 million?
That took over 2 years. Yeah. That was a grind. It got done. And, another fun story from those early days is there's this event called Raise that's a GPLP conference on the West Coast. It might have been like the first, it's been going for many years now, but it might have been the first or second one. So people apply to present. We were so early, we didn't get a slot. But, I thought, okay, this is one of the few events out there where there's actually like real LP networking and it's not some event that's like trying to charge GPs thousands of dollars and rip you off. How do I make the most of it? And I get there all excited to network. There was a list and I literally on the plane had looked at every person on LinkedIn and like studied and was ready to go network. And basically when you get there, it was this 2 different rooms at this conference facility. One side was like GP talks and one side was LP only. And the only time you could actually see an LP was if they got a coffee or tea. So I'm like, oh gosh, how am I going to meet these people? What am I going to do? I basically hung around and it was so awkward and I hated it, but I knew it's what I had to do. I hung around this tea table and I had 12 teas that day because as soon as I saw an LP go, right, the session, like the content session, most people were in the room for, I just, it wasn't relevant for me. I knew what I needed out of this event was to like meet people in person and at least get a chance to tell my story. So anytime someone went over and got a tea, I would then go make myself a tea and introduce myself. Hey, how are you? And I did that over and over. And then they would leave. And then that area would be empty. I'd drink my tea, right? And go to the bathroom a lot because you were having 12 teas in the day. But every single person that got a tea, I just hung out there, awkward or not, and met a lot of people. And, the key wasn't, hey, I have to get the whole Workbench pitch out. But it was like, let me do the quick 20-second who I am. Is this a fit for you to then say, hey, let's actually do a conversation. I don't want to harass you right here, take 5 minutes, 10 minutes of your time, but hey, this is what we are. Is it worth talking? So those are the kinds of things that we had to do to literally just scrape by intro, person by person. But then eventually it got done and then it got easier over time.
Wait, how long did it take you the next fund?
So the next fund was Fund 3. That was 125. We raised that during COVID. So, there's always an interesting challenge for us. Fund 2 was, what is a Workbench? What are you? Do we believe in New York? Fund 3 was, hey, New York's starting to be a cool thing. Hey, your team seems stable. You're starting to do some cool stuff. But again, we weren't momentum chasers. So we didn't have like insane markups at the time. So basically for that fund, the other overlay was, it was mid 21 to like mid to late 22. You're dealing with ZERP. You're dealing with money falling from the sky for certain people. So cryptomania was off the chain and growth investing was viewed as free money. So an example I would give people is, let's say you're an endowment that would do emerging managers. Maybe you had a $5 million slug of Sequoia, but that's all they kept you to. And maybe you had 20 million to deploy to venture this year, right? So technically you had 3 other slots for 5 that could have gone to managers. People like Sequoia that year said, hey, endowment or foundation, that 5 I gave you, our fund is bigger now. You can take 10. By the way, we have new products. We have a crypto fund. We have a growth fund. We have this. So that you actually get $15 or $20 million allocation now. And obviously an LP is going to take that. I don't fault them. But that meant many groups either had 0 or 1 slot for emerging managers. So a lot of people we had built relationships with were basically out of the game. And it's like, sorry, it's not you, Workbench. We don't have money. And that's, for any managers out there thinking about raising, like that is part of the game. It is like an enterprise sales process. People are going to get disqualified for a lot of exogenous reasons outside of you and your model. But again, we just grinded at it. We had built a lot of relationships. We had more of a track record. We had great GP references and intros from people that we had helped and really we always like to say in the early days, we're going to be the best bang for your cap table buck. Every dollar we put on as an investment, we're going to outwork any VC. I don't care, tier 1, anything. We're going to deliver more value, especially at those early stages, than anyone. And we did that. And not only did the founders appreciate it and be incredible references, and not only did founders angel invest, which helped with momentum, but a lot of the other GPs at Silicon Valley firms were like, holy crap, this team, they're actually working their butts off. The least I can do is make an LP intro or be a reference for them. And again, we're very indebted to several folks that really stepped up and helped us. So we got that done in a little over a year.
Wow. I can only imagine we're going to go ahead and raise the next fund with a timeline of that. I mean, it went from 2 years to 1 year. Who knows what will be the next? What are certain values that have treated you well in your life that still continue to this day? And what are certain values that like you had to shave off because they stopped treating you well?
So one of them is that point around gratitude and being grounded as a result of the gratitude. So again, every day starting off, no matter how tired I am or how rushed I am or how early in a meeting I have, just making sure my day starts with, to fill in and praying and just recognizing all the good things I have and just being thankful for it. It really empowers me to just go through the day and just tackle anything, to be totally honest, and just go. One of the other things is, I don't know if there's a value, but just like family orientation. I've been doing this 11 years. I ran into a friend from another VC fund on the street the other day. He was actually talking to Jess, and he was telling me about this sabbatical program that they offer at their firm for a few months when you hit 10 years. And I was like, it sounds cool. And he was super refreshed, but I don't need or want that. And he's like, how? It's been 11 years. And I was like, I just don't feel burnt out. And he was like, how? And as I thought about it, every week, because I'm Sabbath observant, from Friday night to Saturday night, dedicated family time, I cannot do an email. And by the way, I've had deals, especially in our early days where I was chasing and sundown's approaching. I'm about to go, pencils down, phone off. And I've told that to founders. They've actually, by the way, respected that. And then I would call them Saturday night as soon as Sabbath is done. But having that day every week, in addition to obviously all the holidays that we just came past, but it creates structure in my life where no matter how hard a week is, I'm always going to have that time with my family, that time to recharge. And instead of waiting 10 years for it, get it every single week for a day. So no matter how hard I had to work, and by the way, for the first many years of Workbench, was up every weekday till 2 a.m. working, would be off for Sabbath, but then, Saturday night log back on, Sunday night. And I remember a few years in, I could stop the Saturday night part. And then a few years in, Sundays I could reserve for just Sunday night, especially as my kids got older and stuff. So those kind of things really powered me through. And one of the best compliments I get, from our annual meeting when we talk to LPs is they're like, we don't ever see people 10, 11 years into their journey as fired up as you and Jess are. And I'm like, yeah, because we're just getting going. Everything we did, all this hard work was really to get to this moment. And, as I think about 2025, it is venture on hard mode. It is a lot, in some ways, noisier at the early stage, but also less in some ways. And for us, I couldn't be more excited to just be locked in and hopefully have, a really good environment for doing seed deals and working with our founders and helping them. So, yeah, I guess I don't know if that answers it exactly around values, but that kind of structure in my life and values. And then, there's the easy ones around, not working with assholes. And that's such a cliche thing, but in practice, how many people actually do it and will pass on a founder that could end up leading a massive business to a massive outcome. But if you don't agree with how they treat their employees or references that you've heard about them, being able to actually say no, it's things that we really ground ourselves in as a team.
Right. I don't think people realize how hard it actually is to do venture capital. Like you're saying now, you're 11 years in, and just a few years ago, you're able to take Saturday night off and take Sunday off and participate more, or even the timeline to raise your funds have been quicker. People don't realize how hard you actually have to work. They see you now, they're like, oh my gosh, Workbench, look at it. It's so successful getting into this deal and that deal. And by the way, Donnie from Greenhouse, from Runhouse,
yeah.
He's like, you got to ask him about the night we had a Mocha Red when we signed that deal.
Oh man, that's a whole other story.
But people don't realize it's super hard. I mean, to do anything in life, to be successful,
yeah.
It is super, super hard. You really have to dedicate yourself. And some people call sacrifices and some people call this is just life.
Yeah, I don't want to do the woe is me, it's hard card, because I think at the end of the day, we're very fortunate in our position. But I do think to make a mark, and we're focused on the venture capital industry here, to make your mark, especially as a seed fund, I think you need to be differentiated. And I think you need to outwork and outsmart everyone. That's the only way to be. So, compared to other GPs, that's how we try to differentiate. When I think about some of the founders we work with, again, they're also, you just mentioned Donnie, that he goes to bed at 2 or 3. He has a 1-year-old, and then he's up early, and his, part of his team is in Israel. So, he is doing it all. We're, a small piece of that journey, and very grateful to be alongside for that ride and support in any way we can. So yes, it is hard. Yes, founding is hard, but good stuff worth doing it takes work.
Yeah, for sure. How do you want to you mentioned about making an impact in venture, but I want to change that to making an impact in the world. Outside of venture, outside of business.
I mean, for us, what drives us in terms of what we do, and especially in the New York ecosystem, is just putting enterprise on the map here. And again, that's not answering like a social good element, which is like a whole other separate conversation. But when I think about like professionally, what fires me up? Why am I doing this for some other job? There's the saying, if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. But if you can create something net new in New York City and then influence the way that Fortune 500 companies, who then touch all consumers in the world in some way, shape, or form, the way that they're doing their jobs and the way that they interact with consumers, just the impact of that and the scale of that is tremendous. And it's a cool feeling to know you can make an impact. For me and Jess, especially as founders of the firm, we get that entrepreneurial boost to constantly reinvent ourselves while keeping, the roots of the model the same and working with these companies and then impacting the Fortune 500. Like that whole thing is just super invigorating. And that's how we think, again, professionally, because again, the personal thing is like a whole separate conversation, but professionally, that impact is really cool.
And I know we don't have that much time, but touch upon quickly how that will relate in personally. He says,
yeah, I think, look, there's a lot of less fortunate people out there. So, from a family perspective, there's always been a focus on tzedakah and charity and giving back and recognizing that, it's a way to show your gratitude. So there's different causes that we participate in. For my wife and I, one of the big things also is just education. So there's a charity called YRF Darka that's actually quite involved in Israel that does education. And it's not even just for like Israeli schools, but like Druze schools and others around how do you just help bring the benefits of technology that are all around the world to rethink education really and just empower students to learn quicker, better, regardless of where they come from. And, they work in even a lot of low-income areas all throughout the country. And, education and knowledge is that biggest gift to really make an impact and get people started. So that's an example of a group that we're involved in that makes a really big impact.
What would be your message to the world? You have that opportunity to showcase and share your message to 3 billion people. You have that megaphone. What would you tell everyone?
On the less businessy front is just be good people, be kind to each other. There's just so much, especially in a world of social media, there's just so much, unfortunately, it just seems like there's just so much hate that just gets fomented so quickly and people forget there's individuals behind the screen. So honestly, just be kind, and this is one of the things where, to tie it into work, we're in a people business. We have LPs who represent pensions and endowments and foundations who are affecting people. We have founders we work with. We have our team, and it's just at the end of the day, everything is people driven. So we as a team are always trying to hold ourselves up to always the highest ethical standard and just honestly lead by example and do the right thing for all these different constituents. So we're out there trying to do that.
John, thank you. I have thoroughly enjoyed this. I've learned a lot. And I'm going to have to listen to this episode again to get more. There's so many little tidbits and nuggets of wisdom you shared. So really, thank you so much for sharing, being vulnerable and sharing your wisdom with us.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me. This is a fun conversation.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for listening to this incredible conversation with John. I hope you enjoyed it. Now, before you go, please don't forget to subscribe and leave a review, because when you do that, you give the opportunity for someone else to find this podcast so they can benefit too from listening to John's wisdom. Now, I hope you take something that John said and apply it to your own personal and professional